Hi everyone, my name is Griffin Higgins, and today I'm going to be continuing my talk from last semester on Secure Shell, and we're going to go beyond the beginner use of SSH and identity files and move on to SSH certificates. Of course, if you didn't take information assurance last semester, I'll leave a link to the short presentation to get you up to speed on RSA key pairs and SSH authentication. So in a typical scenario, if a user wants to authenticate to a host in SSH, they can either use a username and a password or an identity file, which is just a public key. In either case, a user must trust the host they're connecting to on first use. This is known as TOFU. And this is also why when you SSH into a machine for a first time, you're going to see that the authenticity of the host can't be established. And most people aren't going to go out of their way to check the RSA key pair, the fingerprint of it. So it opens you up to man-in-the-middle attacks, which is why we're going to use SSH certificates. So SSH certificates allow us to place trust into a third party or certificate authority. It allows users to trust hosts they've never seen before and hosts to trust users they've never seen before if they can supply a certificate demonstrating trust from that third party. The third party or the certificate authority has two keys, their public key and their private key. It uses their private key to sign the public keys of users making a certificate that allow them to log into a host machine. The hosts use the public key from the certificate authority to verify the certificate before they let users log in. This is the established third trust we were talking about, and now let's jump into the demo of setting it up.
So today we will be demoing both user and host SSH certificates. And I will be using 3 machines for this demo. I'll be using my Mac acting as a certificate authority. I'll be using my Raspberry Pi acting as the user. And I'll be using my Blueberry Pi acting as the host, which is actually also a Raspberry Pi. So starting with host certificates, the first thing we're going to do is try and log in to our host with our user. When we do this on the first time, we're going to see that we get that TOFU message that the authenticity of the host can't be established. And we're going to say that we don't want to connect because we don't trust this machine, which is why we're going to set up certificates. So the first step in creating our host certificates are to generate our certificate authority key pair for signing and verifying those certificates. We're going to do this with SSH, and we're going to call this key pair host_CA. Notice that it's just a regular RSA key pair, and we're not going to give it a passphrase for now. After this completes, we can take a look at the keys and we can see that we have our public and private key. The next step is that we're going to go to our host and we're going to cat out its public key. We're going to copy it over to our CA, our certificate authority, and now we can see that we have their certificate authority's key, and then we have our other CA keys. Next, we're going to sign that host public key we just copied over with our private key. And we're going to specify that with -S is going to be our private key. -H is going to be the host certificate as opposed to a user certificate. The -I is the identity of the host we want to sign. And then lastly is the actual host public key. After we run this, we can see that we've actually signed that public key and it's valid forever. And you might not always want to do this, so later I'll show you a way where you can actually restrict the amount of time that it's valid. We can also take a look at the new certificate we just generated, and now we're going to cat it out and copy it over to our host. It also helps to make sure that their certificate has the same permissions as the other keys in the same folder, so we're just going to do that. And now after we've copied that certificate over, we just need to change the configuration so that our SSH server will use it. So once we're here, we're going to go to the very bottom and add host certificate, and then we're going to give it the location of our certificate. Next, we're going to restart SSH through systemctl. So we're going to run that, and now we're actually done with the host setup. Now we just need to configure our client to look for the certificate. So we're going to go back to our CA, and we're going to cat out its public key, not the private key. So we're going to go up and copy it over, and we're going to copy it over to our host or our user. And we're actually going to change file, so we're going to change the known hosts. And this is important, so you have to use @cert authority and paste in the public key of the certificate authority. And now we're done. Lastly, if we did everything correctly, when we go to log in, we should no longer get the error message that the host is unknown, the moment of truth. Yay! So now that we've set up our host certificate to authenticate our host to our user, let's now authenticate our user to our host with user certificates. The first step is the same. We're going to generate a new CA key pair for user certificates. Again, it's just an RSA key pair, and we're not going to have a passphrase for now, and we can take a look at them. Next, we're going to do the same on our user machine, but we're just going to generate a key pair called user instead of user CA. And this also isn't going to have a passphrase, and we can take a look at them. We're now going to copy over our user's public key so that we can sign it with our CA. A few key interesting things to note is that once we sign our user certificate, we can also specify a couple more interesting things. First and foremost, we're going to specify a user so that when our user logs into our host, they'll have something to log in with. So it's a PI. This can also be used to specify role-based access control. And we also have a -v flag, which will set the validity of the certificate. So we're going to set it for 15 minutes, and then later we're going to come back and check to see if it's invalid. We're now going to sign our user's public key, and we'll see that it's actually going to be valid for a specific time rather than forever like our host key was. But we can do the same for our host key if we wanted to. Next, we're going to copy over our CA's certificate to our user. And we're going to save it. And we can see that we now have 3 keys. We have our private key, our public key, and our certificate. And that's all we have to do for our user. Next, we need to copy over our CA user public key to our host so that our host can authenticate the certificate that our user presents it, or verify it, sorry. We can take a look to see that our CA user public key is here, and we can see that it's right there. But now we need to tell our host to use it, and we're going to configure our SSH server again. And again, we're going to scroll to the very bottom where we just put our host certificate a minute ago. And we're going to add trusted user CA keys, and it's going to be in the same directory, but it's going to be the one we just supplied. Now all we need to do is restart SSH, and that's it, we're done. So now all we have to do from our user side is supply our certificate, our private key, and specify the user and the machine we want to log into. And notice now that we won't get any warnings about the authenticity of the host, and will be dropped right into our host machine. And it's just that easy. So about 15 minutes has gone by. Let's check and see if our certificate has expired. We're going to exit, and then we're going to try and log in again. Notice now it asks us for our password because our certificate is invalid, even though we still have our private key. Thank you for listening to my presentation on SSH certificates. If you'd like to know more, here are some of my references, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.